So welcome back. Just as we start on this next session, the question that can be asked, and Tiffany's asked, is in terms of writing in the first person. In the second essay, you're asked to reflect on your culture, your background, and so it would be tempting to write in the first person. But I find if you do that, it's very easy to slip into, I think that, I feel that, with less content and without substantiating what is written. So it's best to write in the third person wherever you can. Scholars say you could even write, "It is the opinion of the author of this essay that." And if you do that, you're actually stepping outside and looking at yourself from the outside, and you are objectifying yourself. That is, you're looking in on yourself. Now, one practice that I encourage that works quite well is that if you keep a journal, and in the journal you can write in the first person, and you could write, "I have found that." And then if you quote your journal, and if you were to reflect on that you wrote on the 1st of August 2022 in your journal, that you could then begin to examine what you wrote. And so you could write, "From my background in a particular school, I have found that." And then you could even objectify that. As a matter of fact, you could almost tongue-in-cheek say, "And a teacher I know has observed that," which is really looking in on yourself, you know, and in brackets, not their real name. And so it's possible then, if you look objectively at your views, you can then examine your views in a more careful scientific way, and you could look at the reasons you hold those views. So this combines the value in the journal of the freedom to write about your feelings and emotions. But when it comes to putting these thoughts into your essay, because you're then looking objectively at what you, the person, wrote, you're looking from the outside objectively then and describing and writing about that. I encourage, as I say, a paragraph in the first 3 paragraphs or so could be written in the first person. And I encourage towards the end of your essay, the last third of your essay, you could have a paragraph there in the first person. But often writing in the first person is not as easy in an academic essay as writing in the third person. So the third person would be easier. Any questions about that? We're speaking before the break about the use of language. One of the things that we're doing when we are using language is that we are communicating, and we are communicating in from us to others. And because we're communicating from us to others, we're encoding the message, and we have to rely on the other people seeing the value of the message that we're encoding. And we have to recognize that there's noise out there and other viewpoints that affect them. And sometimes people use a communication diagram such as this to express the idea that you encode the message in words, then it has to be decoded by the receiver, who may have a different background and culture and different experiences. And then they need to encode the message that they give you as feedback, and there's noise there that interferes that you must interpret. And often there is this pressure on. Now, academic audiences often have an expectation of third person objective writing, but as Christians, we also want to include our faith perspectives as well. And so there's a challenge to do that. One way to do that is the author of this essay, being from a Christian background, holds the view that it is valuable to consider God as a living presence in our world, who guides the events in this work. So it's possible to combine the third person and the first person, whereas when we're speaking one-to-one, we might say, I believe God does this, God does that. And we're speaking differently perhaps to the way we'd write in an academic essay to an academic secular audience. The most important goal of academic writing is not to sound smart by putting lots of big words in, but is to communicate clearly to help you and the reader to understand what you are writing. And to do this, often we will paraphrase. And so in paraphrasing, we'll say that N.T. Wright, the New Testament scholar, says, and we will write that Tom Wright, the New Testament scholar, says, and we may paraphrase what he says. If we paraphrase, we should not be quoting word for word. If we quote word for word, then you have to put quotation marks around it and say exactly where it comes from. But if we paraphrase it in our own words, so Tom Wright, the New Testament scholar, describes the person of Jesus as, and so on, we would still put at the end of that section the reference, and we would put the year, we'd put the page number there as well in our quotation. So you've got paraphrasing, you've got quotations, all of those are going to be important. Personally, I'm not so keen on direct quotations. Some students use a lot of them. I tend to prefer engagement with the ideas rather than direct quotations in the material that people are reading. When you're writing, writing is very much an aid to your thinking. When people speak, they often use 2,000 or 3,000 words. But when they write, they often access 20,000 words. And we use words that when we're writing that we don't use when we are speaking. And more academic discourse often uses more words than more friendly contemporary discourse as well. So writing's a great aid to our thinking and to critical thinking. And it's widely used as a tool for communicating ideas about our thinking. Writing and placing your thoughts on paper can be a great opportunity for self-understanding, for thinking and critical thinking skills. So as you gather information in this subject, it's worth writing it down. And often when I take notes, some of my notes I'll put into direct quotes, just to remind me that I've quoted that person directly. And then other notes I will then paraphrase. And then I want to know what is the material that I've written myself. And often I'll put a little sign next to it. And then in summary, it seems that scholars. And so this sentence now is one that I'm working on myself. The other thing you'll find when you're writing, that there can be repetition. And so you'll write something, you'll gather some material, and then you'll write something that's brilliant and new. And when you look back, you discover, oh, I wrote that one paragraph ago. And so a lot of your work is going to involve editing where you remove the repetition. And one of Australia's great historians, Manning Clark, said that he wrote 3 times what he published. So 3 times the amount of what he published. And so when he wrote a chapter of, say, 5,000 words or 2,000 words, he would have written 6,000 words. And it's the 4,000 that he leaves out that gives him the 2,000 quality words that he includes. And so that's not a bad practice if you've got opportunity to do that, is to write more than you include. So the 6,000 words is the gathering of information. The 6,000 words is the thinking through, working through, trying different ways of saying things. And then the 2,000 words is what you publish in the end as the quality material. Writing provides an opportunity for students to think through their arguments, to use higher order thinking skills. And you can try different ways of thinking about things and compare them. Laria and Jerome Brunner pointed out that higher cognitive functions, analysis and synthesis, seem to develop most fully and only with the support of written language. So often you only think more deeply about things when you write them down. Janet Amig, in Writing as a Mode of Learning, and this is available online, says that a writing-centered classroom encourages students to write because in writing, the students think. And even with younger year levels, when students write down the name of something, then it's a way of articulating what they're thinking about. So writing uses the left and right hemispheres of the brain. It encourages thinking with different parts of the brain. It combines the hand, writing, typing, the eyes, looking, and the brain. So writing that's well integrated takes us through cycles of reflection. Scholar so-and-so said. Connection. Do I agree with scholar? Do I disagree? Engaging. It gets personal. What do I think? It gets self-reflective and self-rhythmed. It also engages with higher level thinking and learning. So writing as opposed to just talking, and talking can be useful as well. You could take your phone or a recording device and go for a walk, and you could think, in this essay, this is what I'm trying to say. You could even have a notepad and you could write on the notepad. So you go for a walk around the block and you could write on the notepad, this is what I'm trying to say in this essay. And you might take notes as you walk around the block. I'm not sure if you can do this in the shower as well. I mean, what happens if a good idea, do you need waterproof notepads and, so different, actually, what about if you're driving and a good idea comes to you? Noel Poole-Stookey, who wrote Puff the Magic Dragon with Peter, Paul and Mary, he said it came halfway through driving on a trip. He had this song in his head, Puff the Magic Dragon, and he thought, can I write and drive at the same time? That's a real challenge, isn't it? Perhaps if you got a recorder, you could speak into it. I think he pulled over and he wrote the song down as he pulled over. So writing as opposed to talking forces students to negotiate with the past, the present, the future, the flow of time, the relationship of different ideas. When you're writing, I encourage you to develop paragraphs. A paragraph shows a unit of thought and it communicates well the ideas that you have. So the paragraph's the basic unit of an essay. So you've got an introductory paragraph at the beginning, and then you've got a concluding paragraph at the end. Interestingly, you often need a dummy introduction paragraph at the beginning because you haven't done your research yet. And then having done your research over 3 or 4 days, you often have to go back and rewrite the introduction because only then do you know what you're introducing because it's changed over the 3 or 4 days. So a paragraph is the basic unit of an essay, from an introductory paragraph through to a few paragraphs that through your assignment that flow nicely from one to another through to the concluding paragraph where you draw it all together. Interestingly, in your concluding paragraph, if you don't know how to draw your conclusion, if you go back to your paragraphs through your essay and then keep another page open, you can actually go back through and just pick an idea from each and then put them in your concluding paragraph, and it'll be a summary of what you've said and the major ideas. And then you can think about, how do I structure that summary of my main ideas in my conclusion? So the topic sentence can be the most important sentence in a paragraph. Often the first sentence or so has the main idea in that paragraph. And then when students are preparing their rough drafts, often the paragraphs are loosely connected, but when they edit the paper, that's where they show relationship between the different paragraphs and the ideas. So often you've got a topic sentence at the beginning of a paragraph, then you've got further sentences that expand and clarify the ideas that relate to what you're discussing there. And then you've got support for the ideas, arguments, quotes, citations, comparisons, analogies. And then you've got a concluding sentence sometimes in your paragraph that links to the next paragraph. And so it's this series of sentences in a paragraph that communicates to the person, the lecturer, the teacher, that the person has organized their thoughts and ideas well. And then it's the series of paragraphs through your essays that make sense, that communicate there you've done well. And you got to remember that if you show that your ideas are well organized, that's where you'll often get the higher grades. But if you're not able to communicate those ideas of organization, then there. So Rachel says, I have a voice memo person. It looks funny when I'm in the gym and I'm speaking. Have you noticed all the people who are on the phone these days, on buses and everyone? You see people walking down the street who seem like they're talking to themselves. So sometimes you can develop the ideas in a paragraph by walking around and thinking, what am I trying to say here in the whole essay? What am I trying to say in this paragraph and the next paragraph? So yes, you can use voice and talk it through. And then when you write it down, you can develop these ideas further. Then you should go back and look at the whole structure of the essay. Is there one argument that you're presenting? Is there one key point through the whole essay? You should go back and look at the wording of the question often. And in essay question number 2, there's a quote from Vardy. I think it's a good idea to interact with that quote from Vardy. You can't interact with everything he says, but it's a good idea to interact with at least one point that Vardy makes, and then with 2 or 3 other points as well. Brainstorm the ideas, think about how they come together, but think about the input of scholars and what that means for the ways in which you gather the information together. Link the body of ideas with linking sentences as you go through. So with the introduction, a good argument, a good piece of critical thinking begins with some background, but it gets straight on to the point. You've got to avoid waffling. You've got to avoid ambiguity. You've got to avoid going off in different tangents or directions. You may do that in your diary or journal where you explore, I could look at this, I could look at that. But when it comes to the essay you're handing in, that's where you've got to be focused. This essay will look at, and you've got to focus on the major idea, and then you develop those ideas in the paragraphs that flow through. And then the conclusion should really draw together the ideas from the whole assignment, not just from the last few paragraphs that you've written. The conclusion should also have a sense that you've said something valuable and worthy in your whole essay. So planning is going to be important, and particularly revisiting your planning halfway through the time that you've set aside. And revising and editing is going to be important, because often it's the polishing up at the end that makes the difference. Grammar and spelling errors can lead to a loss of grades, because grammar and spelling errors say you're not taking much care with this, you're just throwing it together. And these days you can also get Grammarly and other programs that will check, and Word has programs that will check your grammar. And also you can get some tutoring whereby people can interact with your work and say you can improve here and there. There's a big difference between getting someone to write your essay for you, mum or your dad, and getting someone to read through and to offer some advice and corrections. That's tutoring, and that's useful because you're learning through the process. And let me encourage you, when you get your essays back, look carefully at the ideas that are offered in feedback on your essay. Remember, Keep it simple. Excessive wordiness is a problem. You want each sentence to say something simple and straightforward and with meaning and purpose. And you also want to show clarity in your thinking. So choice of words, it's always concerning if you've got an unclear antecedent. For instance, if you were to say neither Brad nor Polo have ever thrown up after drinking, at least that's what he told me. The word he, we don't know which one. And it or they are also antecedents. It says, it means. Now, these pronouns stand for something, but often it can be unclear what they stand for. So, steps to take in writing well and in writing critically. A critical stance means that you're digging deeper to understand what the author and the text and the argument said. It's paying close attention to not only what they say, but how they say it, why they say it, a bit about their background. And you can often look up the background of the person. For instance, we talked before about critical thinking and in the Stanford Encyclopedia. And so if you were to go to the Stanford Encyclopedia and critical thinking, then if we were to type in critical thinking Stanford Encyclopedia, and then having brought up that article, we could very quickly have a look at the author. And so if we were to put that in there, we might want to put in philosophy and thinking. Philosophy. So it looks like we have some background here to the person. And so it takes 2 seconds to look up the background of David Hitchcock and at McMaster, a little bit of background there, some articles that he's written. And there's the article, Critical Thinking Stanford Encyclopedia. And so we can get a feel for who the author is. So critical thinking seeks to know something about the background of the people that we're writing, seeks to dig deeper into the knowledge of the background. So take a critical stance, recognize the text, the author, the argument has a certain perspective, pay close attention to what the texts say and why, think big picture and bring yourself into it. So the implications for writing is that critical writing and thinking provides strong argument, chooses terms that are precise and appropriate and persuasive, and that makes clear reference to what they are doing there. Now, examiners will often write things like less than careful reading of the instructions, meaning that the student really hasn't taken on board what the question is. And you'll find that even in the class, that there'll be students that you teach won't pay attention to what you say. Weakly constructed arguments, lack of precision. So they wander all over the place. And so it's important that we encourage our children and students to focus and to keep on a clear, sustained line of thought. And they may not know that until they've thought it through. Insufficient evidence, difficulty using the evidence and substantiating an argument from it. A weak evaluation of the assumptions. So often we've got to think through what are the assumptions, what's meant by them. A lack of organized, convincing, rich and elaborating responses to the question. So critical thinking shows that the person is organized, they're convincing, they've got rich, interesting responses, creative insights. An inability or unwillingness to integrate what the teacher has said. So all of these are going to be important. So writing draft papers can be helpful. Responding to the feedback can be helpful. All of this can be helpful in helping you to learn. So we're going to have a whole lesson in a few weeks' time where we're going to look at language. We're going to look at power of language. We're going to look at cultural differences of language and the way people use words. So that'll be all there in a few weeks to come. So you need to be careful of ambiguity and vagueness, that is, try and be focused and specific. You need to define the terms that you use, clarify your terms that you use, and you need to also recognize emotion. Now, emotion is not a bad thing. We're going to have a class in a few weeks' time in which we're going to look at emotions. And in the class in week 8, so week 7, we look at emotions. Week 7, we look at language. In week 8, we're going to look at emotions. And one of the things that we're going to say there is that emotion is not wrong. It's part of the way God has made us. It's just that we need to understand the nature and value of emotions. And there's a real danger of ignoring emotions. So if you've got 21 students and 1 or 2 are sad and 1 or 2 are hungry and 1 or 2 are annoyed, it's important that we understand their emotions. And as teachers, it's important that we understand the emotions that are going on in our lives. When we're tired, when we're annoyed, it's important that we have self-understanding as well. So emotions can cloud clear thinking, but at the same time, they can create bias, but they can also be useful as well. Now, if I was to take 2 different aspects of our life, emotion and our capacity to reason, and if I was to say, Karen, you are being emotional. Or if I was to say, Hannah, you are reasoning. Now, which one's the more negative of those 2 phrases? You are being emotional, or you are being reasoning? And you are Karen, which one?
Emotional.
Emotional. But that's puzzling, isn't it? In that God has made us with emotions, and God has made us with a capacity for reason. And I think the answer to this dilemma is that it's where emotions can often be unacknowledged, they can be uncontrolled, they can be unengaged. And so we need to acknowledge and recognize emotions in our lives as teachers. And there'll be times when we'll be happy with 2 or 3 students and unhappy with 2 or 3. But as a teacher, we're meant to treat all the students equally. And so we've got to acknowledge our emotions and biases, and then we've got to respond accordingly. And the same with students. At times there'll be students who'll be emotional. So emotion's not something to be dismissed. Emotion is a part of the whole life. And so in that week, when we look at emotions in week 8, we'll go back to the whole idea of the subjective and what it means. We live in a time where there's a great emphasis on experience. There's a great emphasis on intuition, and it's not necessarily bad, but the phrase "you're being emotional and you're being rational" indicates that we live in an age and a time where the rational is overemphasized and the emotional can be underemphasized, and that can be important. Can I get everyone then to write down what are some things that have stood out today and stood out in this last lesson as we've looked further at critical thinking, practices in critical thinking, and also at ways language is used, way you can use language in writing of an assignment. And then just at the end now, we've looked at emotions. And emotions can be part of the whole critical thinking process. You can be motivated because you feel strongly about something. That's not wrong, but it needs to be acknowledged, self-knowledge. We began this last session by talking about the subjective, and in an academic essay, we try to use the first person and the subjective less, but we can use a journal or a diary to write down emotional, subjective feelings, to own them, to understand them. We talked a little bit about cognitive behavior therapy, is this idea that if you think differently, tell a different story, look at things differently, then you can have different emotions associated with that. And we can teach our students how to understand their emotional world, understand their thinking world, and understand the ways they respond. Tiffany, what stood out to you today?
So what stood out to me is the third person writing. I found that very helpful, and that's going to hopefully show in my assignments that I've learned that. And just that you should probably have more qualitative writing than quantitative. Like, don't focus on the word count as your first point of focus. You should focus on what the question is saying, how you interpret it, and then definitely going back and editing. I think that putting it out all out on paper and like you said, writing 6,000 words only using the quality 2,000 is important.
So good. And we can also include in there the idea of a mind map. And sometimes you write your main idea in the middle of the page, and then you draw some arrows and they'll flow along from that. Karen, what stood out to you?
I like the language side of things today, that language is verbalizing our thoughts, and different social groups or students or our peers have different forms of language that they use, and that we have to be mindful of the language that we use around others. I like the different reading, critical and non-critical. And our emotions are another form of students expressing their thoughts. So whether it be anger, sadness, frustration. And I also enjoyed the essay writing help and tips we got there, and writing in the third person.
Yeah, so good. That's a great overview. That could be the structure of our presentation today, which is very good. Hannah, what stood out to you?
For me, it was a lot to do with like the essay writing and like and you're saying like the objectivity and subjectivity and the emotional component of language, and how just different ways. So for me, I love like reading novels and things, but I also struggle to get my words down. So just those tips about like going for a walk and using your phone and talking into your phone to outline your assignment and then be able to write it and note take. That's, I think, just going to help me in general, which will be really good.
And you also have some programs. They used to have Drag and Dictate and others. And I think on your iPhone, you can sometimes talk in and it'll write for you. Most people, once they start to practice their typing, they get faster and faster, and they find they don't need a writing program, but they're available, and so they could be worth looking into if you've got a program that will write for you. There are also programs that will correct your spelling for you, and some that will correct your grammar for you as well, and so they can be helpful. Mauricio, what stood out to you?
Excuse me, sorry. The fact that writing especially is like a multi-sensory experience. Right, like from quite an early age, I've always journaled, but I have a very busy internal dialogue. And I know one of our earlier sessions, I said something about when I make decisions, I try to steer away from my sort of emotional side, but it's because I can be quite emotionally heavy, if that makes sense. So I try and give more weight to a more logical process rather than lean on my emotions, because I think too, something else I was thinking as you were talking before, that even though like our emotions, they can help us with our critical thinking skills, but because it can help motivate us and things like that. But I think that comes with the necessity for awareness around our own history and how that may affect our emotions about things, you know, because if we're not aware of how our past may shape our feelings and emotions, then we will think that it's right the way we think, and we won't be aware of our own biases in that sense, if that makes sense. And also the other thing, like the importance of being concise, which I think sometimes, I don't know if you've noticed, but I love to talk lots and lots. So sometimes I can say a lot, and I probably could have just said 2 sentences and been done with it and got my message across. So that's something I need to be mindful of and work on.
And I like what you say there, Marissa, about journal keeping. Nurses in hospitals are often encouraged to write at the end of every week, and sometimes at the end of every shift or day, a short journal entry. And they're particularly encouraged to write about the difficult times. And it's in that reflection on what happened, how did I handle it? They say that's healthy. It's like counseling. You've got someone to talk to, which is talking through the journal that you are writing. And it's important to develop healthy ways of thinking about things. And so I encourage as teachers to do some journal writing where you get it out, get it down, and then move on. And so there are challenges in every profession, including teaching. And so it's important to work through those. And it can be important to have someone that you can debrief with. And you can say, look, I found this challenge or that challenge. So I encourage you, if there's another teacher that you can talk to and say, look, you're someone I respect, you've had a lot of experience, would it be okay once a week, a fortnight, a month or so, just to sit down and have a coffee? Can I buy you a coffee? And we could talk through how things are going. And then possibly, you know, you might make a list of 2 or 3 things that you feel are going well. Do you have ideas there? And 1 or 2 things that are a bit more of a challenge. Do you have ideas there? I think that's important for personal growth, is to have an opportunity to write down and reflect, and then an opportunity to dialogue and reflect. I think as well, it's important to realise there are literatures out there that can help you, YouTubes that can help you. So if you're having challenge getting organised, if you're having a challenge with a certain type of problem that's faced in your class, then there are books, literatures, YouTubes out there that you can look at that will be helpful as well. So I encourage you. There are great points, Marissa. Olivia, what stood out to you?
I was impressed with the language as well, like the sentence that you used, you know, some kids can take it as like in different ways, like, you know, go to your room, some see it as a positive and then some see it as a negative. So language is really important. Not everybody will understand your language.
Yeah.
It's being kind to how others think and the different cultures within the classroom.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. So language is so very important, and not everyone will understand the language we have and the language others have. Nell, what stood out to you?
Sorry. Mainly today it's about paraphrasing, referencing. That's new for me. Obviously been a lot of years in between essays, so I'm going to have to be vigilant with that and get some constructive feedback on what I'm doing there. So just trying to include it into my writing without making it just stand out as a single entry, like trying to blend that in and include it, which I'll need help with, but that's okay because I'm identifying it early. So but it just makes you rethink about how you used to train. Like you used to write and you just needed your introduction, and then you did like 3 paragraphs and then your conclusion, whereas now to put that through all your paragraphs, and so to speak, like at the high school, use TXXC, or your alarm systems, and just doing up your matrix to try and get you organized. Just to have to do that myself instead of helping kids with it, I think is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, so good. And if you type into Google the term paraphrasing, referencing Australian university study skills, words along those lines, it'll bring up a number of universities like Australian National University and writing, paraphrasing guidelines there. So I think every week or so, it's worth having a look at some of these resources that many of the universities are setting out to encourage students to do well, to support students as they go on. So I encourage you to make use of these resources that the universities in Australia and overseas are putting out to help not only their students, but any students who wish to make access of this material to improve the way in which they write and engage. And you can even look at Australian university study skills, essay writing skills. There's a huge number of resources that are out there put out by the universities around Australia. Make use of them. They can be very, very helpful. Nat, what stood out to you?
What stood out to me was when we looked at language and that words have meanings, but they also have an emotional impact. And I think that can also come across the way we've understood the story or the tone that it's been told, which can also have that impact.
And I think emotion being important as well reminds us that there are ways to give expression to that in drama, in showing different ways of handling emotions, understanding emotions, what's going on with emotions. That can be very, very important in equipping the students, and it can be important for us in helping us understand what's going on. So they're great points there, Nat. Very good. Leonie, what stood out?
What really stood out for me was the whole cultural approach, especially here in South Africa. There are like every area, every province has so many cultures. So it's important that we're aware of that and take the children's context. Just think about the children's context. And also the whole essay writing thing. It's important to go over that, and it's good to go over that again, just to refresh your memory and to improve on your own skills.
Yeah, so good. They're really valuable. It's important to look at those. So thank you, Rachel, Amy, Bridget, and Tiffany as well. I think we've run out of time there, but hands up anyone who's got any questions as well. Yes, Rachel.
Not about our lessons right now. I'm just what times and days do we have class, because there's already an overlap on 2 of my classes that I've got to talk to Ken about, so I wanted to double check our days and times so that if I needed to talk to him as well.
Yeah. So at this stage, we're running the class this Friday, and then after that on week 2, which will be in 2 weeks' time from today. So not next Monday, but the one after, and then 2 weeks' time from that. And we're running the class from 2 to 4 p.m. Certainly for the next 3 times. So it's week 2.
So it's 2, 4, 6. So we
yes, 2, 4, 6.
The even weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. That doesn't affect my other classes. I just,
Yeah.
because I was like, if I've got to already talk to him about, you know, this lot, I might as well get it for this.
Yeah. And then there's a 3-week break, and then week 8 comes up after that break. But by the time we get to week 8, that's a bit further on. Any other questions at all?
With the break, so there's a 3-week break, so then there'll be week 7, and then it will be week 8. So we'll swap the fortnight. Does that make sense? Is that what that means?
Yeah, I think that's what happens, is so that it'll say week 8 on your calendar. So if you go to the calendar, then in the calendar, which you can download, it gives the Mondays, I think.
The Monday is the 17th of October. I already had the calendar up just to.
So that's
I haven't been able to find the calendar. So
yeah, so week 8, it's Monday's the 17th. So the Friday will be the end of that week there. So it could be the 21st or so is when we come back after that break.
I'll add a link in the chat for you, Hannah, so you can access it.
Thank you.
Yep. And then another question, can we submit the first forum post at any time? Yes, I think it should be open now. Get in touch if you find that it's not open. And so you should submit the forum post by the end of next week. You may get lesser grades if you submit after end of next week. So we do encourage you to complete a forum post every 7 days to keep the rhythm going, and we encourage you to put in that 5 to 10 hours there. So thanks, Rachel, for that. Yeah.
Sam, you asked me to remind you if the dates hadn't changed on Moodle for those the discussion thread due dates. So they still haven't changed on Moodle for me.
That's true. I must get to that. And just let me know, where do I find those on Moodle? So it's the Moodle dates for discussion forums. Is that right?
Yeah, so in the assessment task 1 discussion threads, all the due dates are still semester 1 dates.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. That's slipped past there, but I can certainly attend to that one. Further questions? So thank you, each one. Been a really interesting day today, looking at language. Opens up so many doors, looking at the subjective as well as the objective. Critical thinking often focuses on the objective. One of the great things, I think, is that particularly in our Christian colleges, we're encouraged to think about all of the different aspects of thinking, including emotions, spirits, faith. All of those things are seen as particularly important. And so I think it's great that we can consider those as well. So I'll see you all on Friday. Look forward on Friday to drawing it all together. And that will be a chance as well to ask further questions that you have. And then we meet again a fortnight after that. So thank you, each one. See you then.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.